The chandelier threw folded light across the marble floor, scattering reflections like broken promises. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette in an expensive suit, the silent authority of money and habit filling the room before his voice did. It was the kind of mansion sound that always came with a certainty, a hand that could rearrange lives, with a signature, a voice used to being obeyed. "I need to make love. Don't move," he whispered. Time slowed in a way that only happens when something much larger than words is about to happen. She felt it in the small animal part of her brain, the part that catalogs danger and options in a single heartbeat. Instincts flicked through, freeze, run, call. But the woman who moved through this house each night cleaning other people's leftovers, making beds that never stayed slept in, had another life folded into her apron. She didn't move because moving would be performance. She didn't move because she had rehearsed not moving until she needed to. She didn't move because stillness sometimes is a weapon. He stepped up into the room, the scent of expensive cologne and freshly laundered arrogance following him. He was close enough that she could see the tiny flecks of gray at his temple, the way his hand trembled, slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if the ground were shifting beneath his feet and he didn't want anyone to notice. He thought he had surprised her. He thought he had the advantage. "Sir," she said, voice calm as linen. "You don't own me." He blinked. The two words landed between them and reverberated. He smiled with the kind of easy self-assurance that had bankrolled entire charities and speechwriters. "We both know the truth of what I can give you," he said, as if money were a shape that could be slid across a table toward anyone who asked for it. She reached, slowly, for the dustpan on the cart beside the sofa. Not to bargain, not to hide, to keep the moment ordinary, to make him comfortable, or careless. "I can give you nothing, and you could still be everything," she said. Her fingers brushed the recorder pinned cleverly between the pan's handle and the lip. It had been there for 3 nights, humming like a little insect, catching confessions and casual cruelties. Tonight it would catch more. He laughed softly, a sound that tried to pass for charm. "Come now, don't be dramatic. You're a sensible girl, a pretty girl. You know how these things work." She didn't say pretty. She'd been called many things in his life. Handy, quiet, invisible, but not that. She kept her face neutral, the placid mask of the worker who'd mended holes in his curtains and smoothed his children's bedspreads. Underneath, a different life pulsed. A badge-numbered name that hasn't yet been printed in paper. A list of other names, other houses, other hushes she carried with care. "You're trespassing," she said. There was a smallness to the word, itself a legal shard, and yet it carried a weight he couldn't easily ignore. He moved closer, presuming proximity would unbalance her. He could have one look and redraw the world. He had made that assumption all his life. "Don't test me," he said. The whisper was thinner now, edged with an anger he liked to keep private. She slid the dustpan to the corner, fingers steady. Her other hand brushed his sleeve as she passed him. It was accidental, feather light, like a current exchanged. The contact was a promise that the next step would be hers. "Do you know what you're saying?" he asked, incredulity folding into a harmful kind of amusement. No man who gives so much asks less in return. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The recorder ticked, tiny and faithful. She cleared her throat. "Let's talk about what giving is," she said. "Give me your name." He cocked his head, as if the request were absurd. "Gregory St. James," he supplied, the name falling like a coin. He'd never had to introduce himself to a maid before. He enjoyed it, one could tell. "Gregory St. James," she repeated, like a librarian checking a title. "Do you remember Miss Hayward, 2012? The intern who left in tears the same week you held a private meeting in the study? What about Miss Morales, 2015, who suddenly found new opportunities after you offered her a place to talk things over?" The air shifted. The record had caught the name, the dates, the sighs between his polished sentences. He had never imagined being quoted back at him in a small household voice. "You're making claims," he said, the first real edge of panic. "Claims backed by recordings, police reports, testimonies." Her voice remained even. "You offered to help people in ways that weren't help. You told one woman you'd ruin her career if she refused. You told another she'd never work again. This isn't bargaining, it's coercion." Gregory's jaw tightened. He had always measured power in terms of what he could take or give without consequence. The corridors of his mind ran like spreadsheets: exposure costs, reputation risks, lawyers' numbers. He moved to the writing desk and began rifling through drawers. "You think you can burn down my life with words on a machine?" She watched his hands like someone watching a patient refuse a necessary surgery. "I think I can make sure you answer for what you did," she said, "for what you've been doing." He slammed the drawer shut. It was a slap disguised as furniture. For a moment the room was smaller than it had been. "You set a trap," he said, a new tone of wounded incredulousness. "You think blackmail is something you can dress up as justice and—" "It's not a trap," she cut in. "It's the end of one." "Then you won't be the one to end it," he snapped. "Not a maid, not someone who wanted her rent paid and her mother cared for. You're playing a bigger game than you can handle." The phrase "playing a bigger game" was both a warning and an accusation. She had considered it. She had slept in cheap motels, eaten poorly, tailored a life around this mission. She had been careful to keep her story plausible, a maid with steady hands and steady courage. She had also become fast friends with people who had names, but needed protection more than apology. She had learned how to coax truth out of frightened mouths, to offer solace and a plan. That plan led here. "One more step," she said, pulling the recorder into view and thumbing the play button. The room was small, and the recorded voice that spilled out was not hers. It was a tight-voiced young woman who had worked in Gregory's office for 2 months and moved out in the middle of the night. She spoke about a meeting that lasted 2 hours, about a drink being pushed on her, about the way she felt cornered by kind laughter and compliments that hardened into demands. Gregory's face, usually so practiced and impenetrable, flickered. For the first time she saw fear carve into his features, not the sleek, polished fear of market loss, but something more raw. He held his hand over the speaker as if trying to smother the voice. "Stop this," he said. "This is a setup. A setup for you," she answered. "Or are you going to admit this has been a pattern?" He looked at the servant's cart, at the dustpan that hid the recorder, at her plain hands, and something in him snapped. Not moral strength, but another calculation. "You think you can ruin me," he said. "You think people will believe someone in my employ over me? Over the board? Over my family?" She leaned in close enough to see the tiny vein at the base of his jaw. "I think people will believe the truth when it looks them in the face," she said. "And I think the truth is better than silence." He tried to bargain, like a man in a losing hand who thinks money will change the game's rules. "I'll pay you," he offered. "I'll leave a fund. I'll pay for your mother's care. I will make you comfortable." There was a soft pulse of something human in him now, an attempt at salvage. But she had heard this language before. It was always the currency of guilt, gilded in gold. "No," she said, "I won't take hush money. Not from you. I won't be bought." "Then you'll make a terrible mistake," he said. There was less menace now and more a strange flattery, like a wounded predator acknowledging that a prey was worthy. "You don't understand what people will do. You don't understand the reach." She did understand. She'd seen boardrooms bend, seen lawyers shuffle documents, seen the cost of truth. She had also seen the faces of the women he'd used, hollowed, fierce, ready. She remembered the woman with the chipped front tooth who told her, "If he goes down, I want something for my girls." She remembered promises made in kitchens and cheap diners. Evidence would be gathered. Lawyers would be called. The story would be told. She walked to the window and drew the curtains a fraction. The lights of the city winked back like a jury. "It's not just me," she said. "You thought you were alone. You thought your money insulated you. You were wrong." At the word wrong, his actor's mask fell away, and something like real panic took its place. He lunged suddenly for the recorder, fingers slick with haste. She stepped aside, and his hand closed on empty air. There was a collision, a chair scraping, a vase tilting, the kind of movement that breaks the polite silence of luxury. He reached then for the only real thing he trusted, his influence. "I'll call security," he said. "My assistant will tell them to remove you. They'll say you've been stealing. They'll say anything. People listen to me." She had planned for that. Her free hand was under her apron where the second device gleamed, tiny, wire-thin, connected in real time to a lawyer she'd worked with for months. He had been waiting in a car a block away, fingers on his phone, ready to file restraining orders, to contact reporters, to send the recordings to a friend in a newsroom. This wasn't a reckless gamble. It was a relay race with prepared legs. Her phone buzzed once quietly, the signal she'd arranged. She tapped the screen and hit send. The lawyer's voice, crisp and official, announced over the line, "We are recording. Police have been notified. Please stay where you are." Gregory froze, mid-lunge, as if the air had turned to glass. He looked at her, then at the doorway, at the polished floors that had never needed to bear his shame. He looked suddenly very small. "Please," she said into the quiet, and now she was speaking not to him but to the house that had harbored so much behavior. "Please let this be the last time someone thinks they can take what they want. Let this be the last time words are used as handcuffs." There was a long minute where nothing else was said. Then, as if the seams of his life had finally given, he laughed. A sound raw and unfamiliar. "You've ruined me," he said. It was not a threat now, it was recognition. "Maybe I'm saving somebody," she replied. The police arrived within 20 minutes, though to him it might have felt like an eternity. They were quiet and professional, brought by a precinct used to handling difficult calls. He tried to charm them, to pivot, to explain it away with the practice stories of rich men who had accidentally overstepped. They listened to the recordings, took notes, and asked him to come down to the station. He argued. He promised. He watched his world, piece by gilded piece, move from bedrock to quicksand. When the car took him away, he did not look at the maid. He kept his chin high, as if dignity were something that could be kept in posture. She watched until the taillights winked out, until the estate returned to its hum, and the chandelier lights reflected things that had no place to hide. After the arrest, the interviews began. The women found each other in unexpected places, in cafes where they exchanged dates and promises, in playgrounds where they compared notes, in whispered phone calls where they planned and steadied. Some sought money, some sought apology. Some wanted reputations righted. They became a chorus demanding that the world hear them. Her name didn't appear on billboards. She went back to work, to the room she had cleaned and the meals she had prepared, but with a different posture. People treated her differently, some with curiosity, some with contempt, but mostly with a cautious respect. The story became a headline for many days, then a footnote in Seasons. Gregory hired better lawyers, of course. There were settlements to be negotiated, decisions about restoring reputations or allowing them to crumble. The rich have the resources to fight narratives. The truth, however, had momentum now. Months later, at a small gathering in a battered church hall, one of the women, the one with the chipped tooth, stood up and announced that the settlement money had been put into a foundation. Not a foundation for grand art galleries or for nameplates on hospital wings, but a fund to help those who had no lawyer, no witness, no voice. It offered counseling, legal aid, and a small stipend that could mean the difference between staying and leaving. The maid, who had become a kind of quiet organizer, helped sign the papers. The real shock wasn't that the powerful man had been stopped. Power had been checked before. The shock was how ordinary courage, a whisper, a recorder, a refusal to be bought, had rippled out and changed a small grid of human lives. The public's appetite for spectacle was fed, but underneath it, something more substantial had happened. Accountability had been made less optional. One evening, as she polished the banister in a different house, a young woman stopped her. "Are you the woman?" she began, and then stopped, unsure how to ask admiration for something that had almost cost her everything. She smiled, handing her the dust cloth. "You did the right thing," the girl said, eyes bright. "My sister needed the courage to leave." She said the story helped her. She folded the cloth and tucked it into her apron. "Courage isn't a thing you find," she said. "Sometimes you borrow it, sometimes you lend it. Mostly you decide to use it." On quieter nights, after the day's work was done and the city had gone draped in sleep, she would think of the millionaire and the way he had whispered, a command disguised as desire. She would think of how such a whisper had turned into a confession, played back in a small, ordinary room until the walls could no longer hold the secret. She would think of the women who had stood up, and the lawyers who had listened, and the reporters who had written. She would think of the foundation with its clumsy but hopeful name, and the small check that helped a mother leave an abusive partner. There was no grand happiness, no movie ending where everyone got everything they wanted. There was, instead, a slow rearrangement. Reputations trimmed, lives made safer, a community learning to look out for its own. The millionaire would never be quite as untouchable. Some doors would close to him. He would still have money and influence, but the ledger in his head had changed. Where he once counted favors and opportunities like currency, now he counted a different balance, one marked in losses and hearings and quiet convictions. She never stopped working. She never wanted to. There were still too many stories, too many houses that hid the same patterns, too many people who thought a certain kind of power gave them a pass. She had discovered, in that small, violent whisper, a truth about herself, that she would rather stand in risk and be whole than live safe and be small. A neighbor asked her once, over a borrowed cup of sugar, if she regretted it. "Do you regret everything that happened?" the woman asked, sipping tea. Regret is a complicated thing. She thought of the nights on the cheap motel mattress, of the way her mother had worried, of the nights where the cost of courage looked too high to pay. She thought too of the woman who smiled at her child's recital because she had finally left a bad job, of the mother who could now breathe without bracing for a phone call. "No," she said finally. "Regret is for things you did without trying." This was an act of trying. Outside, the city kept moving. Lights blinked in apartments and houses. People made small mercies and terrible choices. Inside, in rooms that smelled of lemon oil and linen, the maid kept working, keeping a low profile until someone else needed a hand. She had been whispered at and tried like a coin. In the end, she had kept the recorder and put it in a safe place. It was not a trophy, it was a tool. There would be other recordings, other whispered lines, other men who thought themselves clever enough to use a voice to take. When a child in the neighborhood later asked her what she would tell girls who were afraid, she knelt to the child's height and spoke simply. "Don't let anyone make you small to make themselves big," she said. "Say no, be loud if you have to. And when you can, tell someone, tell many somethings." The millionaire's whisper had been meant to silence. She had given it back the only way she knew how, by turning it into noise that could not be ignored. That noise became a tool for others, a beginning she had not intended when she first tucked a recorder into a dustpan. It was, in a way she had never expected, a kind of love. Not the kind he had demanded with his whisper, but a love that chose protection over possession, that chose to use power to heal rather than harm. And that, she thought as she closed the pantry and walked back to her cart, was the shocking thing. Not that a man who had everything could be stopped. The shocking thing was that a woman who had nothing but her courage could do it.